Hello, welcome to this lesson. So this one is on sentence types. Okay, there are three main sentence types in the English language. So our learning objective is to identify and craft your own simple, compound, and complex sentences. So when we're thinking about identifying them, do you know the difference between them? Can you identify them? That will tie into the reading part of the exam when you do come to sit your GCSEs. And then obviously crafting your own links into the writing part of the assessment. So let's have a look then. So I just want to say, just before we start, okay, in order to understand this lesson, you also need to understand another concept. So sentences are made up of clauses. Okay, that's what we call them. These are the words and phrases. And there are two types of clauses. So we have independent clauses. Okay, so these make sense on their own. So this is an example of an independent clause. So I went to the shop. So we've got the subject here of I, and we've got the verb went. Okay, so we need to have a subject and verb in there. And this obviously makes sense on its own. And then we have the dependent clause. Okay, so these don't make sense on their own. In fact, they actually need to be attached to an independent clause to make sense. So if we have a look here, we've got after dinner, I went to the shop. So the after dinner part is the dependent clause. Okay, it doesn't sound finished. It doesn't sound like it makes sense on its own. So it needs to be attached to a clause that does make sense on its own. A nice way to remember this one is when we think about the word independent. Okay, we often call people independent when they're able to do things on their own, right? They have that freedom. So again, a little bit like the clause, it makes sense on their own. It can stand alone. When we think about the word dependent, we think about someone that genuinely needs someone else's help. It might be a child to a parent, right? A child is dependent on their parent. It might be a patient in the hospital who's dependent on the doctors and nurses, right? So I like to remember it in that way. So independent makes sense on its own. Dependent doesn't make sense on its own. So it has to be attached to an independent clause. So with that in mind, let's have a look then at the next slide. So, how much do you already know about these three sentence types? You might recognise them. If you don't recognise them, don't panic. But I want you to see if you can think of what words might fill in the gaps here. Okay, so you can pause it and then I'll show you the answers. And a little tip, just think about the clauses that we've just gone through. So independent and dependent clause. And then there's a couple of other gaps here that have different words in. So just see if you can identify these ones. And just pause the video. Okay, right, I'm going to go through this. So the first one, a simple sentence contains one independent clause and is often fairly short in length. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So a simple sentence like I went to the shop, okay, it's independent, it makes sense on its own, and it's also fairly short in length. Okay, if you want to get this down, please do. Okay, make some notes now. Okay, a compound sentence includes two independent clauses linked by a conjunction. Okay, so I went to the shop and it was raining. Okay, so a conjunction like and, but, however, also. Okay, so you need to be researching those if you're not that familiar with conjunctions. And then we've got a complex sentence. Okay, so a complex sentence contains an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So this is where it's different to the ones above here. So we have an independent and at least one dependent clause. So a clause that doesn't quite make sense. So again, get this down if you really want to obviously get this down. You're not quite sure on sentence types, but we'll have a look now at practicing a little bit more identifying them and obviously applying them. Okay, so let's have a look at simple sentences then. So a simple sentence contains one independent clause and is often fairly short in length. And I've just got some examples here. So life is a journey. Okay, life is a journey. A nice simple sentence there. He plays the drums. Okay, he plays the drums. So again, often quite short in length, and they make sense. And I want you to have a go now at writing your own simple sentence. Okay, so again, pause this video to practice writing your own. And just for an ambition task, for those of you that feel like you can stretch your knowledge a little bit further, how would your descriptive writing sound if you only used simple sentences in it, like these ones here? So have a think about what impact or effect that might have on your description or your story. Okay, so just pause this video and then we'll have a look at compound sentences. Okay, so compound sentences then. A compound sentence includes two independent clauses linked by a conjunction. So we've got some examples here. So we've got, again, I've used the ones from the previous slide. Life is a journey and it is worth living. Okay, so we've got two independent clauses here, and then we've got a conjunction in the middle. Oh, sorry, let me just, couldn't see the cursor then. No, I can't see it in yellow. I'm gonna have to do another colour. Okay, so let's do it in this one. So this is the conjunction, okay? But we've got the two independent clauses there. Okay, let's have a look at this one. So we've got he plays the drums, but he would rather learn the guitar. So again, we've got two independent clauses. Okay, so we've got he plays the drums, he would rather learn the guitar, but then we've got the conjunction linking it. Okay, but. So again, for a task, write your own compound sentence now. And for an ambition, I want you to write down as many conjunctions, okay, that you know, or maybe research if you're not 100% certain. So a few examples here like and but, see if you can find any more conjunctions. Okay, let's have a look at complex sentences then. So a complex sentence contains an independent clause, remember that's one that makes sense on its own, and at least one dependent clause. So it doesn't quite make sense on its own. So let's have a look at this example. When times get tough, remember that life is a journey and it is worth living. So if we think about let's do it in purple. Okay, so the dependent clause here is this first one, when times get tough. Okay, so when times get tough doesn't make sense. It sounds like it needs something added onto it. So that's where obviously the independent clauses come in. Okay, remember that life is a journey. It is worth living. So this dependent clause needs to be attached to an independent clause to make sense. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Even though he plays the drums, he would rather learn the guitar. So hopefully you can see here that where it says even though he plays the drums, okay, that doesn't quite make sense on its own. Just by adding even though in front here, it sounds unfinished. Even though he plays drums, he would rather learn the guitar. Okay, so that is where the independent clause comes in. So now I want you to write your own complex sentence. Obviously, you can get inspired by how it's done here and how I've built this up from the simple to the compound to the complex. And then for an ambition task, I want you to think about this one. So how would a story sound if it was only written using complex sentences? So what impact might that have, do you think, on the story? Okay, I'll let you pause this and then we'll have a look at the next slide. Okay then, just to check your knowledge, I want you to do this matchup activity. So we've got simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence on the left, and then on the right, we've got some examples. See if you can match them up. So you can either write it out properly in your books, or just think if you've not got anything to write on, and then I'll show you the answers in a second. So just pause the video. Okay, let's go through the answers then. So these are the answers here. So we've got 1A, so a simple sentence. She drove the car to the supermarket. She drove the car to the supermarket. Nice, clear, simple sentence. Then we've got the compound sentence there. Let's have a look. 2C. It was cold and it was windy. Okay, so we've got two independent clauses with the conjunction in the middle. And then lastly, complex sentence is this one. So he will come out to play once he has eaten his breakfast. So here we've got the the independent clause, and then we've got the dependent clause here. Once he has eaten breakfast. Okay, so it doesn't quite make sense on its own there, so it needs to be attached to the independent clause. So hopefully that makes sense. Get these down if you do want them as well. Okay, so if you've understood this so far, you're doing a great job. We're just going to have a look now at application of knowledge. Okay, so I want you to write about one of your favourite memories. Okay, it could be something small, something big, it's completely up to you. And in doing this, I want you to apply the knowledge that you've got from today. So for the success criteria, okay, include a simple sentence. Remember, that's one independent clause where it makes sense on its own, and you should have those examples to refer to. Include a compound sentence, okay, so two independent clauses linked by conjunctions such as and include a complex sentence, which is an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. And for the ambition task, craft a simile, metaphor, or personification into your writing as well. So I've done a lesson on this. It's still in the Back to Basics playlist section. So please do have a look at that. And if you think you can do this ambition, then that's even better, okay? But really, if you can do this, then you've achieved the learning objective today. So pause this one, and then we'll come on to the review. Okay, so for the learning objective, okay, to identify and craft your own simple, compound, and complex sentences. Hopefully feeling really confident being able to identify them and being able to practice crafting your own, okay? But again, we've just got a little RAG code here. So red for no confidence, amber for some confidence, and green for lots of confidence. Okay, so I want you to be marking where you are situated, okay, how confident you feel on these sentence types. And if you're not sure about whether you should give yourself a green, maybe you're in the amber or maybe you're in the red, think about how can you get here, okay? How can you get to the green? What sort of things could you do? So have a little reflection there as well. And of course, lastly, if you do have any questions, okay, or you'd like to leave some examples of any work that you've done in the chat, please do, and I'll absolutely do my best to get back to you and give you some feedback as well, because I know you don't always get the feedback that you need when you're in school, okay? It's hard to get that one-to-one sometimes. But again, thank you so much for joining. And please do take a look at some lessons if there's anything else that you feel like you need to push up on your knowledge on.